Hi there, friends. Happy Holy Week. This is Jeff Kassman, and I am here with the latest episode on Welcome to Tradition. I am talking today to Louis Tofari of Romanitas Press, and we have a very timely conversation. Louis, welcome to our chat today.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
So I have requested you to join me today. Our friend Jim Vacante could not be here because he's got all sorts of responsibilities at his local chapel for preparing for Holy Week liturgies and Easter singing. He's very passionate about this topic. He wanted me to tell you and other listeners, but he couldn't be here. And what we're talking about are the Holy Week liturgies, and in particular, we're talking about the 1955 reforms. So you'll hear us talking about the pre-55 and the 55 reforms. These are the major reforms made to the liturgy in the Holy Week, or minor reforms, depending upon how you look at it, that have become rather controversial. And I have to say, and I've been going to traditional liturgies for 21 years now. In recent years, I noticed a dramatic increase in interest of the pre-55 liturgies. Lots of people saying things like, oh, they're better, or, this is before everything went off the rails. But the reason I asked for this conversation today is because something dramatic has changed. This year, people are saying things like they won't even go to liturgies this week unless the priests are using the pre-55. And I found that shocking. I've spent a lot of time trying to dialogue with people about these Holy Week liturgies. And everybody, or rather the majority of people, seem to be saying, well, I prefer the earlier ones, but they can't really explain why. I've even had some say that the Pope butchered the Holy Week liturgies. We're talking about 1955 here, but I can't really get to the core of it. And Louis, I asked you on because you've been studying this for decades. You're very passionate about it, and you've got what may be some surprising opinions about it. So let's kick it off. Would you tell us what changed in 1955 that has people so upset?
So we have in 1955, we have the promulgation of the Holy Week reform undertaken by Pope Pius XII. It takes effect in 1956. And it's through a decree, Maxima Redemptionis. Now, this is actually preceded, what many people may not realize is it was actually preceded in 1951 with the Reformed Easter Vigil as an experimental model. And what's meant by experiment is we've made this revision. We want to try it out and see basically how successful it's going to be, how it's going to be received, how do the bishops like it, how did the priests like it, how did the laity like it. So they had already started with the Holy Week, with the Easter Vigil in 1951. Wildly successful, wildly approved. People were just really taken with what had been done. I should explain quickly what this word experimental means. It has a bad sense or connotation today. Remember that because of the Novus Ordo Missae, because of the new Mass, some of these concepts, even terms, have been given a bad rap. Okay, and we're looking back in hindsight through the lens of the problems of the Novus Ordo to a time where these terms did not mean the same thing. We'll get into that too if we ever talk about like the liturgical movement. At that time, liturgical movement, it was a good thing. Okay. Experimental in this case was, we're introducing something new. We want to try this out to see if there's anything else we really need to tweak. Because remember, one of the major shifts they'd made was restoring the proper times. Okay. And we had been doing it a certain way for so long, which happened because of various circumstances, that we want to make sure we've got this in the bag before we go forward with actually the finished copy, so to speak. Okay. Now, for those people who say, well, this is the harbinger of bad things, if you go back to the Middle Ages, and even before that, you're kind of in a constant mode of experimentation going on. There are always changes being made to the liturgy, and realize at this time there is no consistency to the great degree regarding the Roman Missal, the Breviary, the Ritual, the Pontificale. They not only all have different names, they're different even from not just from diocese to diocese, but even parish to parish. We don't start seeing any real standardization going on outside the city of Rome, because in Rome, they did try to standardize certain things in those churches of the cities of Rome. But not until we get to the Council of Trent. And even there's this great work that takes place for the next 20, 30 years to continue. And it's not even done. There are successive popes afterwards who want to actually do a general reform of the sacred liturgy. In fact, there are reports that St. Pius V himself wanted to take a look at Holy Week and also reform some things there too. So this is nothing new. Everything that we see that eventually becomes the reforms for the 1962 liturgical books, they're already being heavily discussed. They're already being desired by the Council of Trent, if even not before the Council of Trent, and after the Council of Trent. It's just, it can't take off. There's various reasons for this. We get to St. Pius X. He begins with the massive reform of the breviary, some other little things. He announces in 1913, I'm going to start a general reform of the liturgy. That means taking a look at everything under a microscope. And that would have included Holy Week. It would not have been excluded from that. He dies less than a year later. It gets shelved because we're in the middle of World War I. We go through two other popes, Pope Benedict XV, Pope Pius XI. They have a whole slew of social issues to deal with, the church being attacked, communism, the Great Depression, you name it, fascism, you name it, it's cropping up, and they're dealing with this right and left. So they really can't take a look at the liturgy at this time. And they kind of have rather short pontificates as well. We get to Pius XII. He goes through World War II, deals with that, and almost immediately after World War II, 1947, he initiates a liturgical commission that's called the Pian Liturgical Commission, which goes to investigate, again, the concept of initiating a general reform. He's picking up where St. Pius X left off, okay? And they come
Louis,
back.
let me stop you for a minute. You know, that there are a lot of people who take this position that, well, the problems didn't just begin at Vatican II, or more specifically, I think those who really understand the reforms, the later reforms, know that they didn't even happen at the council. They came after the council. But there are people who say, well, clearly the problems had to have been there before for them to have blossomed later. And they point to these kinds of reforms. I know we're going to get into this a little bit deeper later, but what do you say to the people who say, well, those changes that Pius X made to the breviary are in fact, and one of the words here, and somebody sent me, they said these were just foreshadowing the changes that would happen that would lead to the Novus Ordo. So it's kind of like an indictment of Pius X and Pius XII both. Mm-hmm. If you take that thinking, what's your quick response to that?
The quick response is you're talking about apples and bananas, or not even apples and bananas, apples and green beans, fruits and vegetables. They're very different things, and there is a clear demarcation between the two, and that is orthodoxy, what is orthodox theologically and what is heterodox theologically. And there's a clear line between the two of when they go heterodox and when they are still orthodox.
And to your point earlier, talking about Trent happened over decades, right? And
yes, it wasn't done in 5 years.
Or in a week. It took decades. And even then, Pius V was continue to remain interested in reform. And before Trent, we had dozens or hundreds of variations all over the world. I think it's important for Catholics to understand that there is not this. I mean, our Lord, when he ascended, did not drop the 1962 missal.
He did not give us a missal. He did not give us a breviary. He did not give us a ritual. He did not even give us the Bible. He didn't even say, here is the sacred scripture. No, he left it to the church to figure it out under the guidance of the Holy Ghost. And when you look at, so one of the things I teach when I teach liturgy is we start out with the development of the Roman Missal, I call it. This is a historical development. How did we get to a Roman Missal? Because this is a unique book that's only in the West. You do not see anything like a missal, an altar missal, the Missale Romanum, whichever other rite, liturgical rite, Dominican rite, whatever, does not exist in the East. There's no such thing. They're still using the same ancient division of books that you kind of see at Solemn Mass. Okay, but the point is, you start out in 33 AD, Lord Jesus Christ's Last Supper. He presents to them the essential points of the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass. He repeats this, we know, to some degree, at Emmaus, again, before he sends up into heaven, when they're gathered around. Probably also, furthermore, even in the Ecumenical. So there's different writers who talk about the development of the Mass going back to the earliest history. They're also convinced that St. Peter himself was celebrating Mass after our Lord's Ascension in the Ecumenical. Okay. The Holy Apostles had this essential element, which the great scholar, Dr. or Father Adrian Fortescue calls the parent rite. Why can we say there's a parent rite? Because if we look at all the liturgical rites in the church, East or West, they all have great similarities and especially share all the essential aspects, let alone accidental aspects such as use of incense, vestments, even the types of the vestments. We may have a maniple that hangs from here, but the Byzantine have a maniple that goes around like a cuff. They have a mitre, we have a mitre, okay? Very, very similar, great similarities that occur. The prayer texts themselves, some of them are exact copies of each other. So a lot of archaeological research has been done. And the point is, how come all of these share similarities? Because they all come from one source, the Holy Apostles and our Lord Jesus Christ. Okay, but he gave them just the bare essentials and left it to the church and in different areas of the church to develop it according to their needs. This is one of the points Pius XII makes in Mediator Dei, this incredible encyclical on the sacred liturgy, which I have available on my website. If you go to Info Media, drop down and it'll say liturgical documents. Go there. There's a whole bunch of stuff there. And I'm adding even more, but a lot of it's about about the reforms that have been made. So I'm trying to inform people, look, this is what was going on. Let's not just talk out of our hat. Let's actually see what was going on, what was being done, what was being said. And Pius XII makes this point about that the church continually adapts her liturgy to her needs. The liturgy is not a fly trapped in amber. It never has been. For anybody who thinks that Jesus Christ gave us the Mass and that was it and it can't ever be changed, that is not correct. And all you got to do is study a little bit of history to see what enormous changes have occurred to the liturgy over time, not just for the Roman Mass, but all the other liturgical rites. And going to, by the way, one of the most sacrosanct parts of the liturgy of the Roman Mass itself, the Roman Canon, which is literally the oldest liturgical prayer that we have in the entire church. It's the one that we can trace back to the earliest texts that still exist, and it's still pretty similar more than any other liturgical rite. People have this concept, oh, the Roman Canon can never, ever be touched. Okay, it's a piece of stone. Well, no. The canon went under significant development in the early years of the church, and we get all the way up to 600 or 610 AD, whichever date is chosen. And we have Pope St. Gregory the Great, who goes and does some important reforms to the canon, moves some things around, adds some saints, takes some saints away. And then people act like, well, that was it. That was it. It could never be changed again. No, that's never been the church's attitude, because if he could do it as Pope, he can't bind another Pope in liturgical legislation or discipline to do that, especially when every other Pope behind him also had the ability to make these changes. And in fact, they did. And in fact, by the way, some historical evidence that came out, particularly for studies to have St. Joseph's name inserted into the Roman canon, because this came up where people said, well, the Roman canon can't be touched since Pope St. Gregory the Great codified it. And they said, well, actually, there were changes made after Pope St. Gregory. As an example, there were some places where local names of saints were being added to the list. Okay, this was rectified by the Council of Trent. Another thing that would happen was in some places in the Communicantes prayer, not the Communicantes, the Teigitor prayer, the very first prayer where we mention the name of the Pope, the name of the bishop, they would name the name of the king or the emperor, the Holy Roman Emperor. This was taken out by the Council of Trent. About 100 years later, it was allowed to go back in by special indult. I actually have a missal that has it printed in there. Okay. The Regi Nostro clause, as they call it. Okay. So there have been various changes made over the centuries, back and forth. So, and again, some of these changes were made also according to the taste of the time. Like during the Middle Ages, there were a lot of things that were, they liked long liturgies and they liked a lot of superfluous things. This was just the medieval spirit to some degree. Not bad for their time period, okay? But we get into our time period, and already even at the Council of Trent, there's this great desire to see a return back to this Roman sense of brevity, tierceness, and simplicity, which is the characteristic of the Roman Mass. This is what makes it Roman, okay? That's what makes our rite so unique, okay? And so there's this great desire to see some of this come back, okay? We see it whether because we have a calendar, a liturgical calendar that's overly cluttered with feast days that just literally been piled on top of each other. And there's complaints about this going on constantly about how cluttered this calendar. You can read, there are books and books and books written on this, okay? This is not an aspect of modernism. It's an aspect of, look, this isn't good. This is not a good liturgical thing that's going on. We can't even celebrate the ferials of Lent anymore. And so we can't keep that spirit of Lent that was originally intended. So you have all these things going on. So what really makes the difference, Jeff, is with these things that are made according to for the 62 liturgical books, what sets them apart from what comes later for the Novus Ordo Missae? The difference is, what is the motivation? What is the motivation? Okay, what is driving this? And in the cases for the reforms that led up to what is not just the Holy Week reform, but what's also in the 62 Missal or other liturgical books, is again, the Roman sense that's going on, which by the way is completely devoid in Novus Ordo. In the Novus Ordo, they want to, anything but Roman. That is the spirit with these guys, anything but Roman. We want Eastern Rite, but we don't want Roman. Why? Because the Roman practices the Protestants don't like. And we can get into that. Is that basically Rome stands for orthodoxy. Rome really stands, and in the Roman Rite, we have greater development of certain things. So we'll get into that in a little bit in a minute here as well. The other thing is pastoral solicitude. What is solicitude for your priests, for your clergy? So St. Pius X is great motivation for the reform of the breviary. The breviary originally was not of obligation for the secular clergy. It was something for the monastics. And it had been developed mainly for these monks who had all the, their whole life was structured to do these 8 canonical hours. Well, now these secular priests want to do it out of devotion, and later they make it actually a law. Well, you secular priests have to do it. Well, now suddenly they have to devote, whatever it was, 4 hours of their day, 6 hours of their day, 8 hours of their day to this breviary. Well, when do they have time to do pastoral duties, let alone eat and sleep? Okay. And by what a lot of people don't realize, we get to the early 20th century, we already have a lack of priests at this time. We go back now to the 18th century with the French Revolution, and that spirit spreads throughout Europe. And we have the anti-clerical movements. We have the closure of these monasteries and abbeys. So it starts out with the Protestant Reformation, where we lost abbeys and monasteries. We get to the English Reformation with abbeys and monasteries. To give you an aspect of where a concept of what was going on, before the French Revolution, there were over 1,500 abbeys, monasteries in Europe. By the time Dom Prosper Garanger arrives at Solesmes, the ruined Abbey of Solesmes in Belgium in, was it 1826, 1832? There's only 30 left in all of Europe. 1,500 to 30, that's what happened. Okay, and this is the collapse of liturgical life as well. So Gregorian chant suffers. By the way, the dialogue mass that was being used at that time also begins to cease in most areas. Okay, so people who have this hang up about the dialogue mass, it's nothing more than the traditional form of how the faithful participated at a publicly offered low mass. And we have the historical evidence. The most telling of it all are letters from ambassadors back home. Hey, this is what we did at home to dialogue at low mass, but they do it differently here, or they don't do this here. We have this documentary evidence. It's not a rabbit pulled out of a hat, and it's not a modernist innovation by any means. Again, going off. There's a lot of misinterpretations of what's going on with the liturgical movement and everything. But anyways, we have this whole thing with the breviary. We have a lack of clergy now to take care of all the pastoral duties that are necessary. Okay. And so Pius X has mercy on these priests and says, we need to do something. And by the way, he's not the first one. There's a precedence of at least 300 years where you had at least 3 or 4 other popes attempt to do something similar, but they just couldn't get to it. It was such an enormous amount of work to do. Because remember, whatever you touch in the breviary, especially concerning the calendar and the classes or ranks of feasts and Sundays and whatever else various, it's going to affect the missal. Okay, it's going to affect the missal. And it's this enormous amount of work, okay, that they basically have to unravel an entire tapestry and then re-sew it back together. Consider that. This was greatly appreciated in his time by the secular clergy. You're like, thank God, I now have a breviary that actually is brief. Okay. And even then, by the way, it's still, I mean, priests will still tell you, it's still rather intimidating to get through it all day. Okay. But they do it. But so you see St. Pius X here, who's motivated by a pastoral solicitude mainly for his clergy in this. Going forward, we see other reforms that have been greatly desired. Okay, going forward, as an example, St. Pius X has the preface for the Requiem, the preface of the Dead, De Functorum, composed. Most people aren't aware of this. There was no preface for the Requiem before St. Pius X. Okay, they used the common preface, is what they did, the Communis. He also introduces a preface of St. Joseph. There's no preface of St. Joseph before this. They use the Communis. Okay, this doesn't get printed until 1920 under Pope Benedict XV because St. Pius X dies in 1914. He's attempting to stop World War I, and unfortunately, it's unsuccessful, and he basically dies of a broken heart. Going forward, we also his restoration of Gregorian chant, of the concept of active participation. This is a buzzword that a lot of people have a knee-jerk reaction. Active participation was the traditional way that the faithful attended Mass. It doesn't take much to read some history and find out what they were doing. From the earliest time on forward, we were not muted spectators in the sacred liturgy. And as an example, by the way, this is why if you go to the East, in any of those Eastern liturgies. I don't care if we're talking about Coptic, Ethiopian, Byzantine, Armenian, you see them participating. Why is that? Why did it happen in the West differently? Because, again, we had this historical circumstances, which they were isolated from, mostly because of being in schism, let alone being under a different political sphere, whether it was the Ottoman Empire, whatever it was in North Africa and Turkey and Greece, okay, Russia, okay. But those they pretty much remained unscathed in what the original practice or what the continuing practice of active participation has been. And really active participation, it's like, well, that word didn't exist, but well, no, you're right, because people just did it. Okay, people just did it, all right? They didn't have to even be explained, all right? So again, pastoral solicitude, because St. Pius X points out, the liturgy is the font and source of Christian piety. And so it's at the liturgy, when we assemble together as a corporate body, as the mystical body of Christ. And by the way, this is positively contrary to the Protestant spirit. We're not a corporate body. The church isn't an institution. It's just a bunch of us getting together and saying, I love Jesus. I'm saved. No, we're a corporate body, and we come together as this mystical body of Christ. The very word ecclesia means the assembly of the body in the church. That's literally where that Greek term comes from. And this is what makes Christian worship, by the way, so unique going forward in time, because before Christianity, the Jews did not all gather in the temple. They were outside the temple. The pagans did not get inside a temple. No, these temples are very small. They could not get inside. They stood outside. The only time the Jews really ever kind of came together, and it was kind of spotty, was synagogues, the synagogue service. But it wasn't for the sacrificial service. It was for basically the teaching, praising service, like we see in our liturgy of the catechumens part of the Mass, but not for the liturgy of the Eucharist or sacrificial part of the Mass. Okay, that's what's unique about Christianity. We build these huge, giant buildings for the ecclesia, the assembly, to come together and worship as a body. And first and foremost were the cathedrals, okay, of this respect. So our architecture itself shows this Christian nuance, okay, and this very idea. And Pius XII is bringing us forth in Mediator Dei, especially about the corporate worship of the body of Christ. Okay, and this is why it's important for us to also join ourselves, not just mentally or spiritually, but also in body, with our voices, with our posture. And there are, you got St. Augustine who speaks about this, and others, that, we don't just stand there and just act like nothing's going. No, we join ourselves into this. All right. So again, you see a pastoral solicitude for the salvation of souls, for the greater sanctification of souls, especially through the source of the sacred liturgy. This is what's motivating these things. And we especially see this at Holy Week.
All right, let's you've just given us a master class on the organic development of the liturgy and the history of continual reform, for all the way to Trent, and then it continued after Trent. Let's talk about the specific changes to the liturgy in the 1955, because I spent a lot of time talking to people about this, and it was kind of like pulling teeth to get people to say, well, what really changed, and then what were the changes that you didn't like? Could you just outline for us the significant changes that happened?
Sure. So let's go through, and very, very briefly, because one of these days I'm going to create a document that's actually going to. So as an example, some of these guys who are advocating the pre-55, they have created some parallel or contrasting documents where it shows, here's what the pre-55 was, here's what they did to the 55. They're more concerned about, well, what did they take away and what did they change? And they put it into a negative light. I think very few of these guys have actually read, why did they do these things? All they see is, well, they changed it, or they took this away. And there's a couple things I'd like to mention. The first thing is, again, The liturgy is not a fly trapped in amber. The liturgy has been undergoing development since day one. Okay. The other aspect is any change that is promulgated by the Pope or the Holy See is legitimate as long as it's orthodox. Pius XII makes this very clear in Mediator Dei. And two other points that should be made: older is not better necessarily. Just because it's older doesn't make it better. Pius XII again points this out in Mediator Dei, condemning an error that he calls antiquarianism. And antiquarianism is this hankering for, well, it must be older, it's older, so it must be better. So as an example, you have liturgical archaeologists or even certain liturgists of this period. This is part of the liturgical movement. And Pius XII is actually giving support to the liturgical movement and encouraging it, while pointing out, be careful of these errors. And one of these is the savoring of things that have been superseded. Certain practices have been superseded because they were considered less developed and replaced with more developed practices. An example was this concept of communion under both kinds. The church had made it very clear, and in fact, early on, that communion under both kinds wasn't absolutely necessary, because theologically we know that we receive everything in the host, body, blood, soul, and divinity. And particularly in the wake of John Huss's heresy that, oh, you must receive the precious blood. There's also lots of practical reasons. It's easier to prevent accidental desecration. Also, we have sanitary reasons, backwash, passing of germs. This was understood. People were actually avoiding the precious blood and having a revulsion to it because of the sharing of the cup. Okay, so that's an example there where it's like, no, we don't want to bring this back. There's very good reasons why we stopped this. Another example of less developed. If you go to the Eastern rites, you'll notice that the only types of reverences that they make towards the Blessed Sacrament are bows. They never genuflect. Genuflecting is strictly Roman, Latin. Our form of our development of giving reverences to the Blessed Sacrament is more developed because we added this genuflection later, and even a double knee genuflection when the Blessed Sacrament is actually exposed. And we have all these special rules for when the Blessed Sacrament may be exposed. Also, we have these great hallmarks of Roman Catholicism, such as exposition and benediction of the Blessed Sacrament, the Corpus Christi procession, the Feast of Corpus Christi. These do not exist in the East. And in fact, if you've ever run across a Byzantine Rite person, they'll actually make fun of our exposition of the Blessed Sacrament and say, Jesus Christ isn't meant to be stared at. He should be eaten. Their concept of kneeling before the Blessed Sacrament to adore, to contemplate, to pray, just doesn't really exist. Do they have reverence for the Blessed Sacrament? Yes, they do, but not like we do. Now, in the Novus Ordo, they want to bring back this. This is in a form of antiquarianism. They use the error of antiquarianism for an ecumenical agenda. The Protestants don't like genuflecting. They might be able to stand a bow because it's a symbol, but we can't handle a genuflection because that's an act of adoration. That means it's really there. So this is where they use an antiquarianist agenda, and from the East to implement an ecumenical agenda. And by the way, it's also towards the Orthodox as well, because the Orthodox don't like genuflecting. They don't like, remember, the Orthodox don't like anything that's strictly Roman. They don't like us Romans, okay? They in fact, they say you guys are heretics for doing this or whatever, and they don't like genuflecting, okay? So there's a double ecumenical agenda there, you might say.
It is fascinating that the folks that are so hostile to the 55 reforms employ this exact same technique against Catholicism that the modernists do, namely the false antiquarianistic kind of approach to things. and also these anti-Roman kind of sentiments, like everything from the East is good, right? I mean, that was a big part of the second prayer, right? The Bunini prayer in the Novus Ordo is, it draws for some ancient Eastern influence, right?
Right. There was a lot of that going on, and especially they wanted to use the so-called liturgy of Hippolytus, which has now academically been somewhat disputed that Hippolytus was even the author of this document. But let me put this into perspective, by the way. We have this 3rd century document, the Liturgy of Hippolytus. It's 3rd century, yes, okay. This Liturgy of Hippolytus, later Saint Hippolytus, so he's the anti-pope who later becomes a martyr saint. He in fact dies with the actual pope, the lead mines of Sardinia, okay. So there's a reconciliation there. The interesting thing about this Liturgy of Hippolytus is there was nothing wrong about this liturgy for its time in the 3rd century, okay? Because the Catholics or Christians of this time still believed in the real presence. Was it completely theologically mapped out like by St. Thomas Aquinas? No, but they understood this is the body of Christ. This is the blood of Christ. This is a sacrifice to the Mass. This is a memorial or even an imitation, or it is the actual Calvary, again, unbloodied. This was understood, okay, in the early church, okay, to some degree or another. So the belief of the priesthood, to be able to bless, to consecrate, okay, that you had to be a priest to do this, okay? All these things are understood, okay? And they're taken for granted, and they didn't need to really be more fully expressed. As we go forward in time, the church desires to bring these points out into greater relief, okay, to manifest her faith even more as we go forward. And especially in the Middle Ages, when there's this great flourishing of Eucharistic devotion. St. Francis of Assisi is one of the largest promoters of it. In fact, his entire reform is motivated by his devotion to the Holy Eucharist, okay? And once we get to the Protestant Reformation, we now have in place what's called a bulwark against the Protestant errors or heresies, which is what we see in the prayers of the offertory and the Roman canon. This clear expressions of what these oblations are for. They're not just merely a thanksgiving of praise. That term is used traditionally, but it's not just that. It's a sacrificial oblation. They are sacrificial gifts. This priest will transform using sacred words of Jesus Christ, this matter of bread and wine with the drops of water into the body and blood, soul, and divinity of our Lord Jesus Christ. This will be the real presence of Jesus Christ. This is not just a memorial in a symbolic way. It's a memorial in the real, actual way of Calvary and what Jesus Christ did during the Last Supper. So we have all this here development, okay, that's gone on. Now the problem is the liturgy of Hippolytus lacks all these clear developments. This is why the Protestants, by the way, there are 6 Protestant ministers in the background, somewhat secretly lighted, by the way, because a lot of people who are involved with the Concilium's work have no idea that they're there in the background. All they see is what's being brought to these the table, the relator, the meetings of here's the suggestions we'd like to do in the new Mass, but they don't know that just a few days before or a week before, these guys flew into Rome for consultation. Okay, and they're being, because they didn't come to the meetings. In 1975, we have Pope Paul VI publicly thanking them, and it's actually a photograph of them, what Pope Paul VI observes and ends up in Lay Observatory Romano. And some people are shocked. They're like, we had no idea this was happening. And I was on the Concilium, okay? These Protestants who are their liturgy experts, are very pleased with the idea of, well, let's reform the liturgy. Let's create the new mass based on this so-called liturgy of Hippolytus as our model. Because ecumenically, we don't have a problem with it. We could accept it. We could use it. And this is this is the problem with a less developed. Was that liturgy wrong? No, in the 3rd century, no. Going forward now, there's a problem. We have the Protestant errors that have come up. These, and now we have to more clearly define what are we doing during this mass. And we've seen, by the way, the proof is in the pudding. I like to say the proof is in the Protestant pudding of the new mass. Because they got rid of because as much as possible for this ecumenical agenda with the Protestants, to remove these things. So all the offertory prayers, gone. What is it replaced with? A Jewish table blessing. And by the way, the most hilarious part of this Jewish table blessing, it wasn't even a table blessing that was used during our Lord's time. There are Jewish rabbis who have testified to this, saying, this is a new construction. This was not used in ancient times. By the way, the Seder meal, which of course Catholics should not be attending, Jewish rabbis who have actually, are scholars, historical scholars, will know that Seder meal, that is not what Jesus Christ would have done at the Passover. They are different prayers.
Louis, you're taking us into one of my other questions, which is the need for Catholics to be able to discern 2 important things. That the first is legitimate authority and when that binds, as you've touched on that a little bit already. Secondly, because there's been a crisis in the church, because there's been so much reformation that's happened in our lifetimes, where we draw the line between what we just kind of blindly submit to versus where we withhold our assent. And it sounds like you're, perhaps not intentionally, but you were starting to provide some examples from the new liturgy, what happened after the council, that people have kind of resisted versus developments, I would call them organic developments that were happening for hundreds of years from Trent to 1955. Could you touch a little bit on how we're justified, when we're justified?
Yes. And this is the key or the crux to the entire. The very first question regarding the acceptance or rejection of the Holy Week reform and all the other liturgical changes that occurred to the 62 books is all pivots on the issue of authority. Then after that, we talk about particulars. And when I get into discussions with people, I always want to bring it back to this principle, but they want to avoid it. All they want to do is pinpoint, well, they did this and they took this. So before I get into that, there's several notions, liturgical notions I want to cover real quick, because you'll see I refer to this whether by name or by implication. One, older is not necessarily better. It could be less developed. Okay. Hankering after the old all the time is a form of antiquarianism, which Pius XII condemns in Mediator Dei. Does that mean we can't ever go back to a previous practice that might be better suited? Yes, but the reason has to be a good one. Okay. 2, what was I going to say? 2, more is not better. In fact, this is contrary to the Roman spirit. The Roman spirit is less is better. We see this in the collects, which are hailed as the greatest achievement, one of the greatest achievements of Roman Latin construction, syntax. If you look at like one of the collects during Lent, which are some of the most ancient ones, or Advent, you'll see how short and terse and yet how much they compact into one short. That is the Roman characteristic. That is Romanitas. Okay. Short, sweet, and to the point. This is a Roman character. If you see superfluous, that's superfluous, but if you see elaborate, flourishing things in the Roman liturgy, this is coming from like the Gallican Rite influence. It's not strictly Roman. Strictly Roman is very short and to the point. In fact, almost austere. Okay, so
and there were times in European history, right, where you talked about flourishing, where a Kyrie might be 20 or 30 minutes long, yes. Right?
The trophy, which they got rid of at the Council of Trent. They said, stop, no. Any case, older is not better, more is not better. Okay. A broken clock can be absolutely correct twice a day. This
All
gets
right.
into
And
personalities.
are you talking about Bunini here? You're referencing.
We're going to go into the Bunini myth, but the point of the matter is a broken clock is absolutely right twice a day. God can draw straight with crooked lines. Okay, so we've seen this in her church history. Even though we had Medicis and Borgias and other corrupt people on the throne of Peter, God still guided. The church was still guided. We've always had corrupt members of the hierarchy. Always. There's never. I mean, look at Judas. Jesus Christ's own camp is infected with a Judas, and he knows it. So there's the makeup of the Roman Curia right there. Okay.
Yeah.
So, or the clergy, the hierarchy. Okay. So those are some principles to understand. There might be a couple others I bring up along the way, but to talk about the issue of authority, this is a really very important issue. And to put this into perspective, in Mediator Dei, this is the first encyclical completely devoted to the sacred liturgy, written in 1947 by Pope Pius XII. It is an incredible document to read. I suggest it to anybody. Please read it. It's a beautiful, magnificent document. And there's a conference I gave, or a video. It's a video talk up on my website. It's called Mediator Dei in the Liturgical Movement. And the point I make, it was made at the conference 50 years in the Novus Ordo Missae. If Mediator Dei had been obeyed in the wake of Vatican II, we would not have had the new Mass. Pure and simple. If they threw it out the window and then they have the temerity in the Novus Ordo to say, we're following Mediator Dei, we're following in the line of St. Pius X of the liturgy. And one thing I want to make very, very clear, the liturgical movement that is involved with the Novus Ordo Missae is not the liturgical movement of Pius XII and St. Pius X. It is not the authentic liturgical movement, because they jettison, again, orthodoxy. And we can go into various characters and what happened. They started out well, ended up astray. The point of the matter is we must give a dividing line once we get to the concilium. Once we get to the concilium, there is a dividing line there, because there's a totally different aspect that's going on that Pope Paul VI allowed, which is based on authority. He enabled it. He enabled this unorthodoxy to go about. He enabled Bunini to do what he did. Under Pius XII, no such thing whatsoever. We'll go into that a little later. So following this idea of Mediator Dei, Pius XII talks about the liturgical authority, that it must evolve from the popes, and that as long as it's orthodox, changes can be made to the sacred liturgy. And in fact, adaptations can be made according to the age of the church, to the needs of the church. Nothing new about this. Now, the fact they may say, well, there was 300-year period where we did not. Yeah, there's because the church was struggling just to exist. You got the Pope running away from, different armies and stuff. And he has to, what do you think? Look at their history of what's going on. They're not worried about the liturgy. They're worried about surviving. The papal states are under attack. The Pope becomes a prisoner of the Vatican. They tried to throw his body into the Tiber. I mean, all kinds of things going on here. So in any case, so we have Mediator Dei basically sets the stage on liturgical authority, where and basically says people should not be departing from this authority. And so therefore, when we institute a liturgical reform, it must be followed, because I am Peter, I am the authority, I have the authority. By the way, regarding authority in liturgical matters, and this is written upon by several liturgists who talk about this. There are several of them. You can read some beautiful things about this, but the Pope is the superior of the sacred liturgy for not just the Roman Rite, but for the universal church. Technically, he's the one in charge over every liturgical rite in the church. Even if he allows the Byzantines, well, you kind of take care of it. You kind of have my permission. Okay, it might have to go through the congregation of the Oriental liturgies for permission first, but in general, the Pope is in charge of everything. He could change the Byzantine liturgy if he wanted to. That's his authority. That's how far his authority goes in that matter. Okay. So I want to, this question of pre-55 is not new. I want to take us back to the year 1983 in the United States of America with the Society of St. Pius X. At this point, they are really the only religious congregation that exists for tradition as a whole. There's some minor little groups that exist in the United States, but nothing really like, they don't have seminaries or anything like this, okay? And at this time, we have a group of priests and seminarians in the United States who are against what Archbishop Lefebvre has told them. He said, you need to follow the 62 liturgical books. Some people try to say, well, they had permission to use the pre-55 books. No, actually they didn't. For a little while, Archbishop Lefebvre tolerated the situation in certain areas of the SSPX, but at Ecumenical, they were all, so Ecumenical up until about 73, they were actually using the 65 missal. He went to the 62 because it's more stable. The 65 is actually a transitional interim, and there's lots of options, whereas the 62, it's solid. You know exactly, you know, what's going to be done in that respect. The 65 is in fact the 62 with some minor revisions, okay? So he goes to the 62. He is already from the word go using the Holy Week reform. Some people claim he was using the pre-55. That is not true. He was always using the Holy Week reform. And if you think about it, you got the Holy Week reform in 55. It's going all the way forward to 62. He's still saying the 62. The 65 comes out, which has the Holy Week reform. He's still using that. Why would he go back to the 55? He didn't, okay? So by 74, he's now saying at Ecumenical, it's consistent what's going on. Once they start to, it wasn't until 1974 that they started establishing mass centers, because before this, the Archbishop was resistant. No, keep going to your parish as long as you can. And he had no idea the Novus Ordo, the problems of Novus Ordo, the problems of Vatican II was going to spread so quickly. Once he realized that was happening, he's like, now we got to develop mass centers. He didn't want to do this. Okay. By the way, in the United States, the very first one for the SSPX happened in Detroit. It's the very first one in the entire SSPX right here in the United States of America, 1973. Any case, so as a result, we have these priests are being disseminated throughout the world. And he begins to now enforce and say, you need to follow the 62 liturgical books. This is what you need to follow. This is what we should be doing as the Society of St. Pius X. Okay. Well, now you have this group in the United States who are resisting this. And there's something behind this. It's called sedevacantism, which is a grave error. And it leads to all kinds of other problems, especially a radical outlook on dealing with the post-conciliar crisis, not only rejecting the Pope, but rejecting other things, having a very rigorous mindset in many things. And Archbishop Lefebvre, he has several talks with these priests, and they said, look, we just have doubts about the election, the valid election of the Pope, if he's actually still the Pope, because he's doing these things and saying these things. And Archbishop Lefebvre conceded to them and said, look, I don't mind if you have a doubt about the Pope, but you must continue to pray for him, and you may not express your doubts publicly from the pulpit or in writing. They said they would do this, but within months they were already breaking the promise they'd made. He had also told them you need to follow the liturgical books that the rest of society was supposed to be following, which was the Holy Week Reform and 62 Missal. It comes to a head because there's one of these newly ordained priests that's part of the sedevacantist group. It's not really a group, they're more loosely, but they all share something similar. And he gets transferred to an SSPX house or priory, and he's told, you will follow the 62 books. And he says, no, I absolutely refuse. I will not do that. And he said, no, you will do it. I'm the authority, and this is what our founder has said you're supposed to do, and this is what we're doing. This leads to a head, basically to a revolt. And in 1983, basically, Archbishop Lafayette had enough and enough with these 9 priests. They were called the sedevacantist 9. And he expelled them from the SSPX. And even after a very long talk, he had a 2-hour long talk with them before he even gave them the paper of dismissal and said, and in the end, he said, that's fine if you want to think that way, but you can't be part of us anymore. Okay. And within the week, he gives a talk to the seminarians that were still at the SSPX's seminary in Ridgefield, Connecticut. This is where St. Thomas Aquinas Seminary was at that time. And if you Google it, only when the faith is in question, it'll come up at the very top, extracts of this talk. I've actually heard it on tape. There's transcripts that are available as well too, somewhere out on the internet. So this is public information. It's been out there. But I want to quote something to you where he's talking about authority. And let me just quote some extracts real quick. Quote, what is the first principle to know we must do in this circumstance, in this crisis of the church? What is my principle? The principle of the church, it is the principle of St. Thomas Aquinas. It is not my choice. It's not my favor. It's not my personal desire. I am nothing. I merely follow the doctrine of the church. This doctrine is expounded by St. Thomas Aquinas. So what does St. Thomas Aquinas say about the authority in the church? When can we refuse something from the authority of the church? He then goes on to explain what St. Thomas Aquinas says in the Summa. I'm going to skip all that and to summarize, quote, that is the principle of St. Thomas, and I cannot harbor another motive to resist the Pope, meaning it has to be something very serious. It is very serious to be opposed to the Pope and to the church. It is very serious, and if we think that we must do that, we must do it. Resist the Holy Father, only to preserve our faith and not for any other motive. We must now do an application of the principle. For me, I think that the liturgical reform of Pope John the 23rd, so 62 liturgical books, has nothing against the faith. You can take the Pontificale, the Rituale, the Breviary, the Roman Missal, and what is in these books of Pope John the 23rd that is against the faith? Nothing. And so, in an urgent tone, I cannot refuse this book of Pope John because he is the Pope, and the Pope gave me this book, and I must obey. It is quite another thing with the reform of Pope Paul VI. In this book of reform of Pope Paul VI is a very grave danger to my faith. It is precisely periculum fidei, danger to the faith. So I refuse it because ecumenism is the idea and the motive of this reform. And this ecumenism, they say themselves, Pope Paul VI, Buonini, etc., all say the motive of the reform is ecumenism. And this ecumenism takes away all Catholic things which are displeasing to the Protestant, unquote. So we see here the clear delineation of what's going on. Look, I'm not following these 62 liturgical books because I happen to like these little practices. No, I'm making this clear change of rejecting the new mass because of the danger of the faith, the heterodoxy, the false ecumenism that is there. I must accept the 62 liturgical books because none of that's present there, and therefore they're legitimate promulgations, legitimate acts of the authority of the Pope. So we have legitimate acts of the authority of the Pope, illegitimate acts of the authority of the illegitimate acts of papal authority. And this is an argument that's being made is that was the new mass even promulgated legally? And there's an argument made by Father Raymond Dulac, who was a canonist, who taught canon law at Econ in the early days, in defense of the Roman Mass is the book now that finally came out in English of his studies. And in there he argues, one, quorum primum was never abolished. Of course, we've had this verified, okay, by Cardinal Stickler in the Pope John Paul II commission that occurred. Okay, two, was the new mass actually promulgated from a canonical standpoint? And the answer is no. The language is not that is necessary for that is not there. Third, we can look at it theologically. And in fact, for a lot of people who may not know this, the first Ordo Missae for the new mass that came out in 1970 was quickly withdrawn because they found heresy in it. Cardinal Journet went to the Pope Paul, he literally rushed into Pope Paul VI's Oval Office, so to speak, and said, this is heresy. There, in the germ, the general instruction of the Roman Missal, there was a Protestant heretical definition of the Mass. They had to withdraw the copies. Buonini is like, well, I don't think it's heretical, but I'll fix it anyways. And then he comes out and says, okay, now it's okay. Well, no, because he didn't fix everything else. You know, the Jewish table blessing for the offertory, instead of an offertory that's been used for centuries that actually defines what is happening, what is going to happen with these gifts, these mysteries, these oblations, these offerings, okay, of the host, of the bread, of the wine, okay? Very unmistakably clear. The Protestants couldn't stand those offertory prayers, okay, because it gets in the way of what they're, it's a symbolism, but it's not real, okay? In any case, you know, so this is the clear distinction that's being made, and this is the line that's drawn in the sand. And unfortunately, for a lot of people who are arguing about, well, we want to go back to pre-55, this isn't, it has not, now some people have tried to say, well, the 55 Holy Week reform is heterodox because of silly little things. I was like, really? There wasn't a single person who ever claimed that the Holy Week reform was ever heterodox. Archbishop Lefebvre, Pius XII would allow that under his own watch. Are you crazy? Any other of these, you know, there were lots of Orthodox prelates and priests at this time, okay? You know, that are going on. This is ridiculous to make these that claim. Okay, by the way, even a severe critic of the Holy Week reform, it's sorry, my mind just went blank. It's Monsignor, he's French, Gromier, Monsignor Gromier, Gromier. Monsignor Gromier, who had been a consultant in Second Congregation Rites, in 1967 gives a conference, I believe it's in Paris. Not even sure why he gave this conference, but in this conference, he kind of just complains about what was done in the Holy Week reform, and he doesn't like this and he doesn't like that. Never once does he ever make the accusation, this is heterodox. He's simply complaining like an old French man would about what he doesn't like. That's really what it should be taken as, okay? You know, and I think he was a little bit bitter because he had been pushed out of the Sacred Congregation Rites at that point as well too. So I think there's things going on there. But the point of the matter is, never once does he make an accusation that, well, this is heterodox. No, he's complaining from a rubrical or praxis standpoint, okay, not from a theological standpoint, okay? And nobody makes these arguments really until we get to the sedevacantist, and the sedevacantist try to pull any straws out of the, you know, to try to support what they want, okay? Because they want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. They don't want to make proper distinctions of, you know, of things going on at different times. And Archbishop Lefebvre is trying to make these distinctions with them, and they don't want to listen. They just don't want to listen. They want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, okay? And they do this on many different levels, from what is the Pope doing? Is he actually a formal heretic versus material? Okay, so then they become their own judges. Oh, he is formal. Okay, and in fact, their own arguments don't even make sense. Okay, to things of the liturgy, to things of church discipline, to you name it, it's there. Okay, and then they make these dogmatic pronouncements as if, well, we're the ones that are right. Okay, and everyone else is wrong. All right.
Louis, I think this would be a good opportunity for us to, we've covered a lot of ground, including how these developments came to be, where they started from, Archbishop Lefebvre's approach to it, kind of the sedevacantist origins of this opposition to the 1955 reform, some of that history. You talked about antiquarianism. That's a lot of ground. Why don't we do this? Let's pause right here. And when we come back with part two, we'll get into some other fascinating aspects about this, whether or not Buonini was really the author of these changes, and The claim, I think you're going to make the claim that the reform is actually an improvement. So I look forward to hearing that. And then I've already been accumulating questions that people have and accusations that they have about these reforms. So let's pause right here. And those that have been listening.
I apologize, but I think if you don't have this foundational knowledge, you can't really approach this with, okay, now I got an idea what's going on here. It's not just a matter of change. There's these really important distinctions and background we've got to understand.
No, I think it's great.
I apologize to your audience. I know you clicked in and you wanted to probably get to the meat of this, right? But this is the meat, and then we get into the icing on the cake.
Yeah, no, and we've got a lot of good things to get into, right? I mean, this is
yes, absolutely.
We've got priests that are trying to mix and match the two. We've got some priests that are trying to just on their own supplant the new with the older. There's a lot we got to chat with. So let's take a break, folks. Thank you for watching. You'll be able to click through directly to part 2 after this, and we'll continue our conversation. This is Welcome to Tradition, and today we have Louis Tofari of Romanitas Press talking about the changes to Holy Week. Stay tuned.